Privyet, comrades, Myron here. Bet you all remember this room, right? Well, surprise, I've got a different kind of video for you all today. Since my last tier list on Hazbin Hotel songs from Season 1 did so well, I've decided to start doing more tier list videos. I had plans for this months ago, and now I'm finally ready to deliver. However, I'm saving the Season 2 Hazbin songs for later, to avoid copyright issues. For now, we will be ranking Nintendo franchises, and the format will be a little bit different. Rather than going through each individual franchise, I will go through the list tier by tier. This list was crafted well before this video, so I figured doing it this way will make for a shorter video. Before I give an example of what I'm talking about, these are the ranks I will be using. I'll probably go back to letter rankings for the Hazbin Season 2 songs video, but I'm not doing that for this one because there's a lot more to talk about with video game franchises as opposed to songs. But, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting with, not enough data. This is a sort of, bonus, or, placeholder, ranking for franchises whose games I haven't played or don't remember playing. Spoiler. This section is gonna take up most of the video, because I don't tend to branch out too much when it comes to gaming. So for the sake of fairness, this section is also dedicated to the franchises where I do remember playing some games, but for one reason or another, I don't consider myself knowledgeable enough to be making a serious judgment. But because these are Nintendo franchises, I couldn't simply choose to not include them in the tier list, as not only would that be even more unfair than me saying they're bad when I haven't played many of their games. But I don't want to see any immature-ass comments saying I missed a franchise that frankly, I'd be impressed if anyone knew what that franchise was. ARMS is one of those exact franchises. Like, literally what is this? Am I supposed to know what this is because of that one Fighter Pass character in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate? No. So, after I started editing this video, I learned that ARMS is its own game. Literally just one game. After making that discovery, there are two things I don't understand. 1. Why was this singular game included in a tier list with franchises that have at least 3 games to their name? 2. Why were any properties of this game added to Smash Bros. Ultimate? I feel the exact same way about Advance Wars, Golden Sun, Rhythm Heaven, and the legendary Starfy. At first I thought Starfy was a Kirby spin-off, but apparently it has nothing to do with Kirby, which is part of why I had never heard of it until I saw it on this list. The other reason is that according to my research, it only has 5 games, 3 Game Boy Advance and 2 DS, and only the most recent one was released outside of Japan. And that one didn't even get a European release, only North American and Australian. If it wasn't for Switch Online, the first 3 games would have been nearly impossible to play without emulation. The only reason I'm including it in this video is because I'm pretty sure the titular character is an assist trophy in Smash Ultimate and Smash 3DS, and it's actually somewhat annoying in the latter. But I am fully willing to trust that no one has heard of this franchise until now. And that's about as deep as I'm willing to dig this rabbit hole. Other franchises I didn't have enough data on were Animal Crossing, Splatoon, Punch-Out, Bayonetta, Pikmin, Xenoblade Chronicles and Mother. These are franchises I have at least heard about prior to this video, but not only have I not played them, I don't see myself doing so anytime soon, due to either a lack of hardware, lack of emulation tools, or lack of interest. Splatoon I'm especially trying to avoid because it's unfortunately gooner bait at this point. Of these particular franchises, the only one I came close to experiencing was Mother, known in the West as Earthbound. There are only 3 games and I briefly tried one of them thanks to Switch Online. I couldn't finish it however, due to getting lost and frankly irritated at not knowing where to go. The Pokemon-esque encounter-style battles made that feeling especially annoying. I should probably talk about Fire Emblem, which I also have not played any games belonging to that franchise. But I didn't have any bad first impressions from those games either. I just haven't had reason to play or not to play a Fire Emblem game. And finally for this section, we have Kirby, WarioWare, F-Zero, Zelda, and Star Fox. These are the franchises whose games I either played too few of, or can't remember playing, but may or may not play in the future. I might have played one of the handheld WarioWare games when I was little, but I have trouble remembering. F-Zero seems like a pale imitation of Mario Kart, so I probably didn't play it aside from F-Zero 99, which wasn't enough to get me hooked on the franchise. I will say this, my research tells me that Kirby, Star Fox and Zelda all got better with age, because the older games available on Switch Online sucked. During post-production, I had a chance to play Kirby Adventure, Kirby Dream Land 1-3, and Kirby Superstar. It's not that these games were bad, they were just way too easy, even with the awkwardness of having to use the D-pad to control Kirby's jump and floating ability in Adventure and Dreamland 1 and 2. But after several tweaks to their respective formulas, it's easy to see why these franchises increased in popularity. Now we finally move on to the Gate section, and the only franchise I'm going to talk about, which I take huge issues, is also the franchise I expect to get the most pushback on, Metroid. Now before anyone says anything, I did give this franchise a chance. I really wanted to give it a fair chance. But I just couldn't. I tried the original Metroid on NES and Super Metroid on the SNES thanks to Switch Online, and both games were absolutely terrible. Super Metroid has a story behind it that has cemented a disdain for 2D open-world games. For starters, you will never know where to go when you need to be in a certain area. Your best way of finding these areas is with armor and weapons upgrades scattered throughout the world, which you find either through Chozo statues, beating bosses and mini-bosses, or just by blowing up floors and walls. The problem is that most of the time these exploitable floors and tiles look wholly identical to ones that cannot be blown up. And you will not be able to tell the difference without either wasting your limited missiles, which you can only get randomly by killing enemies. Zelda on NES did this too, and it's fucking annoying, or giving yourself an eye-strain headache looking for any minor details that would clue you in. Apparently there's some X-ray scope item that allows you to be able to tell which floors and walls can be blown up, but since it's late game, that's not good enough. The backtracking gets even more annoying when you have enemies and hazards placed in a way that makes moving around the world increasingly stress-inducing, as there's barely any room to walk or jump without taking a chain of damage that adds up after a while. Because guess what? Your only healing options aside from health packs also scattered around the world as orbs that may have randomly been dropped by enemies. These special bombs are meant to be used on certain enemies and terrain to either do more damage or explore new places, but there really should not be a limited number of them you can hold. I do not like games that do this, give you special powers that also act as key items. If you can waste your key items, that is not fair. Then there's the finicky ass wall jump and shine mechanics. And before you say, skill issue, shut the fuck up, the timing makes absolutely no sense. Sometimes you'll have to gently graze the wall then jump at the precise collision point between a random pixel on Samus sprite and the first wall pixel that it touches, and other times you'll have to hug the damn wall. Can someone make that make sense? There were so many times where it looked like I had to figure out this seemingly impossible wall jump to progress in the game, and I either couldn't, or I ended up finding another route that I didn't see the first time I was in that area, because literally how was I? As for the shine, it's frankly dumb as hell. Imagine trying to get a running start when in your path are enemies that jump higher than you or can only be killed by a specific weapon. I understand that there's a sense of achievement in figuring out that sort of thing, but I just find it annoying, because there are better ways of recreating the exploration vibe without relying on the player getting lost or sequence breaking the game due to no fault of their own. And to add insult to injury, one of my former mods had to be a condescending douchebag about my struggles, so I had to ban them for breaking Rule 6 of my server, be respectful of other people's opinions. This on its own is inexcusable for me, but I'm not even done. Zero Mission, which everyone said is the best version of this part of Samus' story, carried some of the same exact issues. While you do have a tracker that more or less tells you where to go and where each Chozo statue is, it's not 100% accurate as there are still exploitable walls and floors. And you still have to deal with awkward enemy and hazard placement. The NES Metroid was the worst of the three cause there's no clear indication of how to swap your weapons and armor. I already know I'm going to get a bunch of people clamoring in the comments about me being bad at the game, and frankly I welcome it. But if you can't make your point without insulting me, your comment will be deleted and you will be blocked and exposed for not being adult enough to articulate your point without resorting to name calling. I am fully willing to admit it might be a skill issue on my part, but given that tier lists are inherently subjective, I don't think I should ignore anything that may influence my opinion, and that includes difficulty. And before somebody says, well then just play the Prime games. We'll come back to those later. For now, let's move on to the only franchise I have in dislike. Dr. Mario is literally just a Tetris clone. Or Puyo Puyo for you non-Slavic viewers. Not bad at all on its own, but pretty soulless by comparison to every other franchise on this list. Now we're moving on to the actual good franchises, starting with Luigi's Mansion, which I put up in OK tier. This franchise does exploration right. While it is still easy to get lost, you don't have to worry about accidentally wasting your progression items since those aren't a thing. But of course, just because there's nothing stopping the level progression other than your ability to pay attention when exploring, at which point it's almost entirely your fault, doesn't mean the franchise is flawless. If you don't hold down the B button to run, progressing is going to take a while since Luigi moves much slower in these games than he does in Super Mario. This might be my only complaint about Luigi's Mansion, but the remaining franchises are so much better that certain judgment calls needed to be made. And this is one of them. Now we move on to the like tier, starting with Donkey Kong. This is another franchise that caused friction with someone I know. But unlike Metroid, their disrespect wasn't enough to make me dislike Donkey Kong any less than I already did. Let's talk about some good games. Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3 on the SNES, all of which I completed thanks to Switch Online, Donkey Kong 64 and Jungle Beat, as well as DK Country Returns. Bonanza is probably the only Switch 2 game worth $90 considering we hadn't had a 3D Donkey Kong platformer in 11 years prior to it. And the power-ups in those games are reportedly very fun to use. There's also some unforgettable but dated by comparison titles, or, as some people would call them, classics. I'm mostly talking about the arcade games. The original Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., DK3, and the Japan-exclusive Jungle Fever and Banana Kingdom. Yes, these games introduced Mario, known at the time as Jumpman, and his rivalry with the Kong family, but that doesn't make them not archaic. And unless you have the Nintendo Classics service available through Switch Online, these games require you to go to an arcade that has these machines, which not everyone can do. Also, DK Bongo Blast and Tropical Freeze for the Wii were just inexcusably bad games for their own reasons. I believe all of this balances out the franchise to be placed near the middle of the list. Next up is Mario Kart. This franchise consists of fun little racing games that, despite being intentionally designed for people of all ages and skill levels, has turned into a competitive clusterfuck, at least depending on the game. Mario Kart Double Dash, Wii, and both versions of 8 come to mind immediately in terms of competitive commitment. I've dabbled into it myself in the past, at least on Wii, where you really only see Funky Kong and Flame Runner. Those games, alongside DS and 7, still hold up to this day. However, the same cannot be said for 64, Super Circuit, Super Mario Kart, Live Home Circuit, which is simply a toy, in the arcade games. Mario Kart World has been a huge mixed bag since its inception. People who can afford it love it, and those who can't hate it for being so expensive. The prospect of going up against 23 other players in a large open world with gimmicks that change depending on how you drive seemed very interesting. But was it really worth $600? $500 for the Switch 2 and $90 for the game itself, plus tax. Plus the game has been facing stiff competition from Sonic Racing Crossworlds, and outside of those comparisons, Mario Kart World is nowhere near as talked about as it used to be. Both of these games coming out in such a close timeframe might be part of the reason why the hype died out as quickly as it did. Next up is Yoshi. No, Yoshi's Island for the SNES was not the first Yoshi game. There were 2 games prior to Yoshi's Island, Yoshi for the NES, which was another Tetris clone, and Yoshi's Safari, which was a rail shooter using the Nintendo Super Scope where the Koopalings have taken over Jewelry Island using mech suits. That aside, Super Mario World 2 was the game that cemented Yoshi as its own franchise as well as Yoshi's Island becoming its own series. Yoshi's Island DS was the sequel that introduced Baby Peach and the rest of the 7-star children, and New Island, Yoshi's Woolly World, and Yoshi's Crafted World are all decent platformers with vibrant level design. Nintendo appears to have done a fairly good job breaking away from the Mushroom Kingdom with each of these titles. The stories, if applicable, are simple, but given how common that is for the Super Mario franchise, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that Yoshi would have similar storytelling practices. No one was begging for Yoshi to have his own series. In fact, I've heard it's Nintendo's least hyped franchise. I could be wrong, so they didn't need to go all out with lore that would forever change the history of the Mushroom World. Kid Icarus is mostly known for its titular character Pit being added to Super Smash Bros. Brawl after the release of the 3DS game Kid Icarus Uprising, but I didn't play that game. But I did play the original Kid Icarus for the NES and its Game Boy sequel, of Myth and Monsters. I genuinely had fun with both of these games, but the movement controls in Kid Icarus on NES were quite slippery. Too slippery for me to give the franchise a higher tier, as I kept sliding into enemies and bottomless pits. Of Myth and Monsters got it right. My biggest criticism is the lack of feedback in knowing how many hits I am from beating the bosses. In addition to the fact that the weapon upgrades require you to survive a room with floating floor tiles with difficult to chart movement patterns. The Prime Metroid games being here was another judgment call that needed to be made due to how much people like Metroid for whatever asinine reason. The Prime games are just first-person shooter games with more reasonable exploration and objectives. I played Call of Duty when I was 12 like most of us, and I just hopped back into Overwatch, so really, what's not to like? But yeah, fuck the platformers. Mario Party has always been a fun get-together activity for family and friends, but some of the handhelds like DS and Island Tour were decent solo adventures. 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 10 still hold up today, but Advanced and 9 have fallen to the wayside. We're finally moving on to the really good franchises, starting with Mario and Luigi. This is a series I grew up with and have very fond memories of. Superstar Saga's fast-paced combat made the game so replayable that it got me hoping this would become a series. Partners in Time, while still fun, was unfortunately an overall downgrade due to pacing, and the frankly idiotic decision to turn bros moves into items that you need to stockpile to have a chance of getting through the mid to late game. Controlling Baby Mario and Baby Luigi made for a clunky transition from the GBA to the DS. Plus the Bean Bean Kingdom was way more interesting than half of the areas in Partners. Bowser's Inside Story was the golden child of the 2D era, having some of the best special attacks, the best story, the fastest gameplay loop, and a truly unforgettable villain in Fawful. Also, who doesn't love playing as Bowser? The remakes of Superstar and Inside Story were glow-ups that I'm not 100% certain were needed. Dream Team was a slow burn that was honestly carried by the combat system. Phantasma, while imposing, got shafted much harder than Infinite in Sonic Forces. Nothing changes after E's defeated, where at least with Infinite's death, Eggman's forces were weakened significantly by the lack of phantom copies. And I don't care what anyone says, I had fun with Paper Jam. Where Partners stripped the series of its fundamental gameplay, Paper Jam stripped it of its sense of identity. Despite that, I really appreciated the battle mechanics, the final boss, and the papercraft battles, which were also cool. They sort of reminded me of the giant battles in Bowser's Inside Story. Brothership is even more of a slow burn than Dream Team, but it definitely popped off with the story, to the point where, despite not having finished it as of writing this video, I'm still engaged enough to finish the campaign someday. Until then, Mario and Luigi remains in really like, but not love. Unlike Metroid, Paper Mario had actually good platforming, especially Thousand Year Door and Super. The Partners in 64, TTYD and Origami King are some of Mario's most memorable allies. Super has arguably one of the best stories, and Origami King had some of the best world-building. The series as a whole was a reasonably well thought-out addition to the RPG lineup. None of this praise applies to Sticker Star or Color Splash because they're in a similar situation as the platforming, 2D open world, Metroid games, that being, you can run out of stickers or cards depending on the game, some of which are not only required to beat certain bosses but also required to progress around the world. Color Splash has its pros and cons in this department when compared to Sticker Star because the cards in Color Splash take up the same amount of space, unlike the Thing stickers, which in some cases, can fill up half an album page. But just like in Sticker Star, if you waste your Thing card, you're gonna have to do a lot of backtracking to replace it, which is very stupid for any game with numbered levels to have in the first place. Hoarding your things is not an option in Sticker Star, and the way they tried to fix this in Color Splash was not good enough. Without the internet, you will not know what thing you need for a boss fight or a puzzle until you need it. This applies in both games, but in Color Splash, you have the Ringer and the Know-It-All Toad, who give you hints on what type of things you'll need for an area or a fight. However, these hints come too early for you to even have access to the thing you need, and they're too vague for you to figure out where, when and how to use the thing. The combat in both games is also clunky. They're turn-based RPGs, yet you can't choose which enemy to attack. You always start with the enemy in front of you and move down the line. While this can be strategized around, if your attacks were too strong, you lose whatever sticker or card was selected but not used, it doesn't go back to your inventory. That stings more in Color Splash if you had to paint the card with the Wii U's gamepad then flick it onto the TV. You don't even get experience from fighting, you don't need it. Because the cards and stickers do a set amount of damage, you just get coins to buy more stickers and cards. And whenever the game says it's time to better stickers and cards, sometimes you'll get paint and more stickers, but you'll usually get more of that by interacting with the environment anyway. Color Splash either ignores, replaces, or doubles down on all of Sticker Star's problems in an attempt to fix them, and that causes the franchise as a whole to drop a tier. Now it's finally time to talk about the franchise I actually love. First up, Super fucking Mario. Mario as a character is practically the face of gaming himself. From Donkey Kong to Mario Wonder Switch 2 Edition, this series needs almost no exposition. Mario Bros. 1 might be dated as hell by today's standards, but it being the very first achievement in the entire gaming industry, it set the precedent for the remainder of the franchise. Aside from a few minor hiccups like Mario Bros. 2, Mario is missing, and the new Super Mario Bros. Series after Wii, the franchise has had consistently good releases like Mario World, Mario 64, Galaxy 1, Odyssey, Bowser's Fury, and Wonder. Any criticisms one could have with any of the games I didn't mention aren't severe enough to sway my opinion of the franchise as a whole negatively. Super Smash Bros. Is the golf standard for fighting games in my correct opinion. I don't care about any of that crap about how it was supposed to be a party game yet the community turned it into a fighting game. Platform fighting games will always be superior to 2D fighting games. Ones with stupid ass wall spamming. I had to ban a guy from my server for being an absolute jackass about this and about my opinion on Metroid, and I will not hesitate to do it again if you choose to be disrespectful in your disagreements. Now for the final franchise of the video, Pokémon. Anyone who follows me on Twitter and Discord knows how much I love Pokémon. In one way or another, I've experienced so much of what this franchise has had to offer. Fun places to explore, epic battles to win, the lore, the side quests, the colorful characters. And most importantly, the even more colorful creatures we call Pokémon. I've made so many OCs for the Pokémon world, and I've dedicated quite a bit of my free time into Pokémon discussions on message boards. Absol will always be my favorite Mon, Kalos is my favorite region, Gen 6 is my favorite generation. I could go on and on about how much I know about Pokémon and how passionate I am, but this video is already more than long enough. With all that finally said and done, I can finally show off the completed list. I'll say right now that if I ever have time to visit the franchises I put in, not enough data, rather than remake the entire list, I'll make a retrospective post somewhere on here or Twitter. If you watched this video to the very end, thank you so very much for staying tuned. And to all others, thank you as well. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss an upload. Do svidaniya, comrades.